Hello, my kiddos and kiddas. Today we are looking at the unit circle. And the reason why we call this the unit circle is because all of the radii that we can draw on the unit circle is all one unit. So when we're creating the unit circle, when we were looking at all the xy values of the unit circle, what we like to do is use our special right triangles. So the 30, 60, 90 triangle and the 45, 45, 90 triangle. And what I've done here, because we're looking at the unit circle, in this case, my hypotenuse is always going to be the radius. So that means that if I'm looking at the unit circle, then my hypotenuse needs to be 1. So in order to do that, I have taken all of my sides and I've divided it by the hypotenuse. So in this case, 2. And so anytime I have a 30, 60, 90 triangle, these are the units that we're looking at. And these values, the 1/2 and the square root 3 over 2, these are going to make up my x and y values depending on if we're looking at the 30 or the 60 degrees. And then I've done the same thing for the 45, 45, 90 triangle. I've taken the hypotenuse, which was square root 2, I've divided each of the legs by square root 2 in order to make that hypotenuse into 1. So to represent the 1 that is the length of our radius. And so here when we're looking at the first quadrant, and this is the one that I'm going to focus on because I typically just remember the first quadrant and then relate everything in all of the other quadrants back to the first quadrant using my corresponding angles. So for this first one, if my radius is 1 unit, then if I'm looking at my 0 degrees or my 360 degrees or pi over 2, however you want to look at it, that means that this would be 1 comma 0. So I've gone all the way over to the right 1 unit. I haven't gone up or down, so I'm at 1 comma 0. When it comes to my 30-degree triangle, so across from my 30 degrees, when we did the 30, 60, 90, so if my radius or my hypotenuse in this case is 1, across from or opposite my 30 degrees is going to be 1/2. And then along what will be the x-axis is going to be square root 3 over 2. I'm going to put it over here because it's going to change depending on the triangle that we're looking at. So that means my x value, or what I've gone over to the right, is square root 3 over 2. And my y value is 1/2. And so whenever we're looking at our sine, cosine, etc., our cosine of our angle is always the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So in this case, it would be square root 3 over 2 divided by 1. My cosine of 30 degrees is going to be the square root 3 over 2. The divided by 1 doesn't really make a difference. And then my sine of my 30 degrees is going to be the opposite over the hypotenuse. So 1/2 over 1, or just 1/2. So we can see this as a cosine comma sine instead of just an x comma y. So we now can see our cosine of our 30 degrees and our sine of our 30 degrees in this unit here. Next is our 45, 45, 90. So we got a 45-degree angle here in the corner. And if we look at the sides of our 45, 45, 90, that means I'm square root 2 over 2 for both of my sides. So then my x value is going to be square root 2 over 2 as well as my y value. So then the cosine of 45 degrees, or pi over 4, is square root 2 over 2. The sine of 45 degrees, or the sine of pi over 4, is square root 2 over 2. And then we have our 60-degree mark, or we could say pi over 3. Those are all the same thing. Opposite my 60 degrees is the square root 3 over 2. And adjacent is going to be the 1/2. So then my x value is 1/2. My y value is square root 3 over 2. This means that my cosine of 60 degrees is 1/2, and my sine of 60 degrees is square root 3 over 2. Same thing if I used cosine of pi over 3 and sine of pi over 3. And then my next really important one is my 90 degrees, or my pi over 2. So for this one, we would have gone from the origin and just gone straight up 1 unit, since our radius is 1. So since I didn't go left and right, my x value would be 0, and then my y value would be 1. So the cosine of 90 degrees, or pi over 2, is 0. The sine of 90 degrees, or the sine of pi over 2, is 1. And if you're one of my students, you should definitely ask about my little pickup line that I use for this particular angle and the trigonometry from this particular angle. The last thing I want to look at before I move on from the first quadrant is the tangent. So tangent is sine over cosine. So that means I'm taking my y value divided by my x value. So for my tangent of 30 degrees, I would do my half divided by square root 3 over 2. My 2's would just cancel out, and I would have 1 over square root 3, which we can't really, that's not rational. So when I rationalize, I end up with square root 3 over 3. When I look at my tangent of 45 degrees, I'm looking at, again, my y over my x value. So we've got square root 2 over square root 2 over 2, which is all just the same thing. So my tangent of 45 degrees is just 1. And then when I'm doing my tangent of 60 degrees, I've got square root 3 over 2 divided by a half. It leaves me with square root 3 over 1, or just square root 3. And then if I'm doing my tangent of 90 degrees, I would have 1 over 0, which I can't divide by 0, so this is undefined. So when it comes to the rest of the unit circle, it's not something that I personally memorize myself. We just look at the reference angles for each of these. So for this first line that is drawn, that is next to my 90 degrees. If I were to draw my vertical line straight down to the 180 degree line, this angle on the inside would be 60 degrees. So my reference angle for this angle here is 60 degrees. The angle itself is not 60 degrees. If I were to go from the 0 to that marker, I've gone 90 degrees and then I've gone an extra 30. So this is 120 degrees, which is the same as 2 pi over 3. So for this angle, it is a reference of 60 degrees though, because of the angle that it makes from one side to the 180 degrees. So the y value is going to be exactly the same, square root 3 over 2. And the distance from my origin to the 90 degree marker right here is going to be 1/2. But because I'm going to the left, this is going to be negative 1/2. And so my x and y value is going to be negative 1/2 comma square root 3 over 2. So here, because my x represents cosine, cosine is always going to be negative in that second quadrant and in the third quadrant, because our x values are always negative in the second and the third quadrant. So then here, my cosine of 120 degrees, or 2 pi over 3, is going to be negative 1/2, and my sine of that same angle is square root 3 over 2. And now I'm going to be doing the same thing with this middle angle here. It's one of the middle angles, so its reference is going to be the 45 degrees. However, this actual angle is 135 degrees, or we can say 3 pi over 4 radians. And so that means that our y distance is square root 2 over 2, since it's a 45 degree reference. This will be negative square root 2 over 2 for the x, since we went to the left of the origin. And the last one in this quadrant that we're going to look at is a reference of 30 degrees. And this is 150 degrees from our initial of 0 degrees. So this is 150 degrees. Or we could also say 5 pi over 6 radians. And so that means that we have a positive 1/2 as our y value, and then a negative square root 3 over 2 for the x value. So again, this means that my cosine of that 150 degrees is negative square root 3 over 2, and my sine of 150 degrees is 1/2. And so my 180 degrees, or my pi, because we've gone from the origin and just gone to the left 1 unit, that means I have negative 1 comma 0 as my x and y value. So cosine of pi, or cosine of 180 degrees, is negative 1. A sine of 180 degrees, or sine of pi, is 0. The last thing I want to do is my tangents for each of these. So my tangent of 120 degrees, we're doing, again, our sine over cosine. And so this is going to be almost exactly the same as our tangent of 60 degrees, just it's going to be negative because that x value is negative. So our tangent is also negative in the second quadrant. And so I can do the same thing with the rest of this. Tangent of 135 degrees is going to be the same as tangent of 45, just negative. Again, the x value is negative, so negative 1. And then tangent of 150 degrees is the same as tangent of 30 degrees, just negative. So negative square root 3 over 3. And now it's time for the third quadrant. And so this angle here, if I were to go directly to the x-axis, which is our 180 degrees, it has still a reference of 30 because it's only 30 degrees from the 180. So this is 210 degrees total from our initial side of where the positive x-axis is. Or we could also say it's 7 pi over 6. And so this still has that negative square root 3 over 2. And now because we've gone down instead of up, we are in the negative y-axis, so this is negative half. For my 45-degree reference, so it's the angle in the middle, we've gone 45 degrees past 180, so it's 225 degrees, or we can say 5 pi over 4 radians. And we still have that negative square root 2 over 2. Again, we've gone down, so my y value would be negative square root 2 over 2. And then this last one is going to be a 60-degree reference from that 180. So we have 240 degrees here. Or we could also say this is 4 pi over 3 radians. And we still see that negative half, and so this would be negative square root 3 over 2 as my y value. So we have negative half as the x, and square root 3 over 2 as the y. And then my 270 degrees, we've gone from the origin and gone straight down 1 unit, which means it's 0, negative 1. So then now I'm going to go through and do all of my tangents. So here I haven't done a tangent of 180 degrees yet. So remember, it's the y value over the x, which means it's just going to be 0. We have tangent of our 210 degrees, which is actually going to have the same, again, because it's a 30 degrees, it's going to be the same as the tangent of the 30 degree or the 150 degree, just we have a negative over a negative in this case, which means we're going to end up with a positive square root 3 over 3. So in the third quadrant, sine and cosine are both negative, which means our tangent is going to be positive. And then we have tangent of our 225 degrees. Again, it's the square root 2 over 2 over square root 2 over 2. They're both negative, so this will end up giving us positive 1. And then the tangent of our 240 degrees is going to be the same as our tangent of 60 degrees, which was square root 3. And because this is a negative over a negative, it will be a positive square root 3. And then here, this is very similar situation to our tangent of 90 degrees. We have the negative 1 over 0. We can't divide by 0, so this is undefined. And then we can do our last quadrant. And so here with the fourth quadrant, I really like this completion because we have all these adorable little bow ties that kind of represent each of our reference angles. And so the first one that I'm going to look at is just after my 270. So this is a reference of 60 degrees. Again, we always look at what it is compared to the nearest x-axis. So I drew my line up to the x-axis in this case. And so it's our 60-degree reference, but the entire angle would be 300 degrees, or 5 pi over 3. And then we have our 45-degree reference that's in the middle here, which is 315 degrees, or 7 pi over 4. And then our 30-degree reference right here, which is 330 degrees, or 11 pi over 6. So because we've got a 60-degree reference for our 300 degrees, we can already see the 1/2 up here on the x-axis, which means this is a negative square root 3 over 2 for the y-axis. It's gone down. So my x's are positive, my y's are negative. So I have 1/2 comma negative square root 3 over 2. And then for my 45 degrees, we've got square root 2 over 2 for the x, negative square root 2 over 2 for the y, since we went down. And then for my 330 degrees, we can see the square root 3 over 2 on the x, so this would be negative 1/2 for the y. So you can see all of the x, y values for the 30 degrees are all the same. It's just the signs that have changed depending on which axis, or sorry, which quadrant it's in. So I never memorize every single one of these angles. I memorize the first quadrant, and actually in class I'm going to show you guys a trick to memorizing the first quadrant, and then everything else is just a reference from that first quadrant. And so you don't have to memorize all of these things because that seems like quite the ordeal. So the last thing we're going to do is go over all the tangents. So my tangent of 300 degrees, again, this is a 60-degree reference, which means it's going to be the square root 3. But we have a negative over a positive, so this is going to be negative. Tangents are negative in the fourth quadrant. My tangent of 315 degrees is 1, but again, negative over a positive, so we're going to have negative 1. And then tangent of 330 degrees is a 30 reference, so it's the gross one, the square root 3 over 3. And again, this is going to be negative because it's tangent in the fourth quadrant. Ooh, and then the last one, we forgot the tangent of over here. So this is the same. Tangent of 0 degrees is the same as tangent of 360 degrees. These are exactly the same. So I would have 0 over 1, which is just 0. And that is the unit circle. I hope you guys found this helpful. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. You can also send this to someone else if you feel like it would be helpful for them. Spread the love.